and his business has thrived for 150 years.
Still there?
Still there today.
Where exactly is it again?
It is, all right, you see the intersection of Fairfax Parkway and Sunrise Valley Drive. It's east if you turn and go east on Sunrise Valley Drive. So if you're going south on the Parkway, you turn left. And it's just on your right-hand side. Yes?
There's a your prosthetics in a shop, in an office building there, is that it?
Yes, that's it.
Yeah, because I got something there.
Yeah. That was started by a Civil War veteran.
It's actually in an office building.
Yes. Yeah. There are a number of outlets. It's not the only one. But I thought that would be interesting because there is one here in Reston, and he was a Virginia Civil War veteran.
Was that where that area is when it first started?
I think he started making them in Richmond. That's where he first started making them. At this time, most of Lee's Army of Northern Virginia, plus the combined Union armies of Pope and McClellan, are all in Fairfax County. So around the 1st, 2nd, 3rd of September, there were 150,000 troops, north and south, and probably 50 to 60,000 horses and mules, all of them occupying, in every sense of the word, Fairfax County, camping out, taking whatever they needed to burn for firewood. I'm sure they were using porta potties. But it must have been quite a sight to see troops everywhere. On the 2nd of September, the day after the Battle of Chantilly, about noon, John Pope receives orders to return to Washington, D.C. to finish the retreat. The Union retreat is marked by confusion as men make wrong turns, take wrong roads, they get into traffic jams, and they straggle, and the march stretches out for miles, and it takes days to get everybody back into the defenses of Washington. Elements of Pope's army, including the 1st, the 2nd, and the 5th Corps, as well as Buford's cavalry, move along today's Chainbridge Road, Route 123, from Fairfax Courthouse to Flint Hill, which we now know as Oakton, and then on to the safety of the extensive fortifications around Washington. Lee's Confederate Army also travels north on the West Ox Road, which, as you know, turns into Lawyers Road, and then along north of the toll road, what is today Reston Avenue in North Reston. This portion of the road has had several names over the years, including Ridge Road, 60-Foot Road, and the old Reston Avenue, which is still marked in a number of places. And there are several places in Reston, as you can see here, where it's still visible today. Longstreet's wing, the other half of the Confederate Army, probably took multiple roads, since everybody traveling on the same road, it would have taken forever to get 50,000, 60,000 men moving anywhere. Some undoubtedly followed the same route as Jackson, others branched off toward Frying Pan, and undoubtedly many used the old Centerville Road, heading north toward Route 7 in the area around Drainesville. Stewart's cavalry, including the brigades of Fitzhugh Lee and Wade Hampton, who will later become overall commander of Confederate cavalry, also traveled this route right through Reston. Stewart used a portion of the road here. This is Old Reston Avenue. This is an old aerial photograph. This is Old Reston Avenue moving north, and here's the intersection with Route 7. This is the Drainesville intersection right here. This is the same route that Stewart used in the clash, the Battle of Drainesville, that took place in December of 1861, which I think you had a lecture on here last year sometime. So the same route that you see there. Jackson's men are going to then turn left on Route 7, moving in this direction, and they're going to bivouac or camp for the night around a plantation. And these are modern photographs of the actual plantation house. This is known as Bloomfield or Holly Knoll. It's the estate owned by the Carper family during the Civil War, who were friends of Stonewall Jackson's. The house still stands today off the north side of Route 7, the Leesburg Pike, opposite the current location of the Drainesville Tavern. So if you're driving west on Route 7, most people are going to look at Drainsville Tavern on the left. Look to the right, there's Holly Knoll. Now it's hard to find, it's just off the road, and it is private property. So I'm not encouraging people to go all at once anyway. Yes, I don't know who took those pictures. But as the story goes, the Carpers obviously offered Jackson the opportunity to take over their home and stay in their home. And he gallantly declined to do so, preferring to stay across the road with his men. However, apparently he did bivouac in the field. He didn't occupy the Drainsville Tavern either because it had a reputation for being infested with bedbugs and fleas. And so he avoided the tavern. I know you're shocked to hear that. Well, let's look very briefly, we'll wrap this up, at the strategic situation then following the Battle of Second Manassas and then Oxhill or Chantilly. Robert E. Lee sends a message to Jefferson Davis, President of the Confederacy, in which he says, "The Army achieved today on the plains of Manassas a signal victory over the combined forces of Generals McClellan and Pope. But he had done much more than that. In just over 2 months, Lee and the Army of Northern Virginia have shifted the conflict in the crucial eastern theater of the war from the steps of Richmond, an almost certain Confederate defeat, to Fairfax County and the outskirts of Washington, a distance of 100 miles and a shift in the strategic situation of 180 degrees. Morale among the Confederate population is sky high. They can almost taste independence." Now, what's going on the Union side? In Washington, there is chaos and confusion. Lincoln is quoted as saying, "We are whipped again, I'm afraid." The country's political leadership, from Lincoln on down, is also experiencing a growing lack of confidence, bordering on despair in the ability of the military to save the Union. The public, too, is despondent. A Northern diarist writes this, "The feeling of despondency is very great. Things look disastrous. I find it hard to maintain a lively faith in the triumph of the nation and the law." In the Army, it's hard to overstate the toxic brew of incompetence, jealousy, politics, and dissension that characterized the leadership of the U.S. Army. The campaign ruined the careers of 3 generals. Major General John Pope's performance was a disaster, both for his career and for the Army. Pope is here on the left. On the 5th of September, his Army of Virginia ceases to exist. It is officially merged with McClellan's Army of the Potomac. Pope now has no command, and he is sent west to Minnesota to deal with the Sioux Indian uprising that's going on in Minnesota, and he will be there for the remainder of the war, dealing with the uprising and then its aftermath. His career ruined. Here's an assessment of Pope, written by General Alpheus Williams shortly after the Battle of Second Manassas. "A splendid army almost demoralized. Millions of public property given up or destroyed. Thousands of lives of our best men sacrificed for no purpose. I dare not trust myself to speak of this commander as I feel and believe. Suffice it to say that more insolence, superciliousness, ignorance, and pretentiousness were never combined in one man." I'm not sure how he really felt. It can be said with truth of him that he had not a friend in his command, from the smallest drummer boy to the highest general officer. All hated him. Major General Fitzjohn Porter, who didn't attack, as he was supposed to do, the man in the middle there, became the scapegoat for the defeat. He is arrested, court-martialed, and dismissed from the Army, and he will spend the rest of his life trying to clear his name. General Urban McDowell, the man on the far right, who at one time, at the beginning, at First Manassas, actually commanded the Union Army, is banished to California and has pretty much lost to popular history from there. But Lincoln and his cabinet condemned George McClellan's motives and conduct during the last weeks of August. Lincoln confides to his secretary, "Unquestionably, McClellan has acted badly toward Pope. He wanted him to fail. That is unpardonable. 4 cabinet officers sign a letter accusing McClellan of incompetence and deliberately disobeying orders in not hurrying to Pope's aid at Manassas. Yet, incredibly, on the 2nd of September, Lincoln and Halleck, who's now General-in-Chief, reluctantly offered overall command of the Union armies to George McClellan, over the objections of most of Lincoln's cabinet. Lincoln says, we must use the tools we have. If he can't fight himself, he excels in making others ready to fight. That's standing for faint praise, isn't it? Well, what about the Confederate side? Lee knows that his tactical victories have produced little permanent strategic gain, and the elections are still months away. So he decides to keep the initiative by sending his veteran army on an invasion of Northern territory. And on the 3rd of September, Lee puts his tired, depleted army on the move out of the camps around Drainesville on Route 7, west, out of Fairfax County toward Leesburg. Then turning north on modern-day Route 15 and crossing the Potomac River at White's Ford. So from here, they've now passed through the county and they're moving out toward Leesburg. And then they'll cross over the Potomac River. They're also joined, he gets reinforcements here, Claus and Hill's division. So Lee is invading, which he had hoped to do all along. He's invading Union territory. Lee is aware of the battered state of his army. The army is not properly equipped for an invasion of an enemy territory. Still, we cannot afford to be idle. And though weaker than our opponents and in men and military equipment, we must endeavor to harass if we cannot destroy him. Remember, Lee is focusing on the northern voter. And so if he can't destroy the Union armies, he can at least let the Union population feel the war directly. But morale is high. Lee's move is typical of his style. Porter Alexander, his artillery commander at Gettysburg, said this: if there is one man in either army, Confederate or Federal, head and shoulders above every other in audacity, it is General Lee. His name might be audacity. He will take more desperate chances and take them quicker than any other general in the country, north or south. Well, less than 3 weeks later, Lee's troops will meet the Union Army again and set a sad new standard of American bloodshed. The nation's signature commemorative event of this year, 2012, is the Battle of Antietam, the anniversary of which is the 17th of September. The 17th of September is Constitution Day. The Battle of Antietam was fought on the 75th anniversary of the ratification of the United States Constitution. It is the bloodiest single day in our nation's history. 23,000 casualties, including 8,000 killed. That's one casualty every 2 seconds for 12 hours. Outnumbered 2-1, Lee fought McClellan's army to a tactical draw, but his losses and the huge Union army still blocking his path to go further north forced Lee to withdraw from Maryland back across the Potomac River, ending his invasion and giving Lincoln the strategic victory he so desperately needed. A week later, on the 22nd of September, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. It declared that on January the 1st, 1863, persons held as slaves in states still under rebellion will then and thenceforth and forever be free. It also includes, for the first time, authorization to recruit black soldiers in Union armies in combat positions. The act transformed the goals of the war from preserving the old Union to saving the Union, in Lincoln's words, as it should be, free of the sin and hypocrisy of slavery. Lincoln said this upon signing: "I never in my life felt more certain that I was doing right than I do in signing this paper. If my name ever goes into history, it will be for this act, and my whole soul is in it." Initially very unpopular in the North, public opinion eventually will embrace emancipation. The Union Army became a liberating force as slaves flocked to it wherever it went in the South. And by the end of the war, 180,000 black men will serve in the ranks of the Union Army. That's more than all of the soldiers in all of the combined Confederate armies at the end of the war. Lincoln's address to Congress on the Emancipation Proclamation closed this way, and I'll close our talk this evening this way. We cannot escape history. The fiery trial through which we pass will light us down to honor or dishonor to the latest generation. We say we are for union. The world will not forget that we say this. In giving freedom to the slave, we assure freedom to the free, honorable alike in what we give and what we preserve. We shall nobly save or meanly lose the last best vote of all. Thank you.
For about 20 minutes of Q&A, and then we're going to...
Jim, you want to come on up? Jim Lewis knows more than I do about the roads in this area, so come on up.
Take turns with the mic. For those of y'all who haven't had the privilege of meeting Jim Lewis, Jim is active in a number of organizations. He's active with the Civil War Roundtable that has its monthly meetings in Centerville, and he's also active with the Continental Defense League that protects the historic road. So with that, what I'd like to do is bring you the mic so that everybody can hear the questions. We'll go a lot faster that way. And I'm going to start over here on this side. If you could stand up, introduce yourself, hold the mic close to your mouth, that would be great, and then I'll let them answer. Anybody over here with a question? Yes, sir.
I'm not going to stand. I can't. Easily. My name is Bob Webb. I would like to mention two individuals who were very important in preserving a couple of the sites that we've seen in the program. One was a woman named Annie Snyder, who lived adjacent to the Manassas battlefield. In 1988, our very own Phil Hazel, our great developer, and I think he did this, I think, wanted to build a shopping center about the size of Tyson's Corner on the single remaining portion of Manassas battlefield, which happened to be precisely where Longstreet gathered his forces for the final attack. It was a monstrous development. Never happened because of Annie Snyder. She was a Marine recruiter in World War II and marshaled friends and neighbors to fight against this. And she was the damnedest opponent Hazel ever bumped into. I was at a congressional hearing one time. She was testifying. She could cry on cue. And Hazel walked in and said, "Oh, Jesus Christ, there's Annie." And he left. And she won and he lost. That was never built. A couple of years later, Disney tried to build another thing to the west and disappeared. Annie was formidable. I was working for the Post Center in the Southeast about this movement, and pretty soon it had spread internationally. I got responses from Berlin and Australia, and money was flowing into the Annie, and it was just a remarkable PR campaign. The second person was a fellow named Doug Lansell, and some of you may know. For at least 25 years, he determinedly fought to have a park at Ox Hill. And what is there is, I think, almost entirely his work. And both of them are examples of what citizens can do in historic preservation. A lot still needs to be done, but if you can find a cause, go out and grab it and don't let go.
Thank you, Bob. Absolutely.
Thank you. Okay, questions? Hang on one second.
I should have mentioned Jim and the Hunters Mill Road gang too. They had done the same thing there, preserving something that most of this is non-existent.
Okay. So,
There's a terrain feature in the Civil War battle. I think it's this one. Hazel Grove. Hazel Bridge. Am I right on that? Second Manassas.
Hazel Grove?
Yeah. Which guy was it?
No, I believe that's Chancellorsville.
Chancellor. Okay, sorry. Forget that. I have a second.
That's next year.
Next year. I was wondering, is this battle, what do I even mention? It's a lot of fuss.
Yeah, a lot of artillery there, yes.
It's an abysmal story.
can't hear you.
I don't
Can
get
you
it.
hold the mic closer?
Okay. It's abysmal. I'm talking about battlefield intelligence and
Or the lack of it,
Yeah,
yes.
lack and battlefield security, communication. I don't
Yes.
understand. I mean, you mentioned scouts once. You said that Buford was there, but it was cavalry.
Right.
You said that as they were coming through their gap, Union forces were, whatever was left.
We're trying to stop them getting through the
The
gap.
word didn't get back.
Well, here's
Spoke about
the...
this, and why? What kind of communication? How could it be so foul out?
Well, thank you. The question about how could the intelligence or the information not get back to the commanding officer? Well, as a lifelong intelligence officer, I can tell you that it's one thing to tell them, it's another thing for them to understand and act on the information. As Henry Kissinger once famously said to one of our briefers at the White House, "I'd like some more information on this topic," and the briefer said, "Well, I've already briefed you on that topic." And Kissinger said, "Yes, I know you told me, but you didn't convince me." Pope was notorious, probably the classic example that we can cite in the Civil War of someone who just ignored the facts until it was almost too late.
Okay, anybody else on this side with a question? So we've got a couple of announcements here.
Now we've got a couple over here.
Yep. Alexander, I'm going to let you have one question. Okay?
Alexander Burke. My question would be with the emancipation or two, like a sample like Canada, England, and Europe or two, how do they really interpret? Because wasn't in the British newspaper they call Abraham Lincoln a baboon?
Well, I think it was actually George McClellan in one of his letters to his wife. Remember, I told you you should burn the letters to your wife, who called Lincoln the original baboon. But your question is an interesting one. How are other countries reacting to the Civil War and this whole issue of emancipation and slavery? And in fact, that's another thing that was riding on the whole second Manassas campaign and then the Antietam campaign, and that is Europe was watching. Because England and France and many of the other European countries depended on southern cotton to run their textile mills. And when the Northern Navy was blockading southern ports so that cotton wasn't getting to those mills, there was a recession in Europe. They wanted an end to the Civil War, and they really didn't care who won. As a matter of fact, there was a lot of sympathy for the Confederacy in Great Britain. As a matter of fact, the day of the Battle of Antietam, there was a debate that was scheduled in the British House of Commons as to whether or not England should intervene and try to bring the two parties together for peace negotiations. But after the Battle of Antietam, England backed off. And then once the Emancipation Proclamation was announced, and suddenly the war is no longer just about politics, it's now about the morality of slavery. England, who had abolished slavery a generation earlier, backed off.
Okay, right here.
This may be a
You
naive.
want to introduce yourself?
All right, I'm Hank Schoenstein, Reston. This may be a naive question, but in today's world, if President Obama signed the document, it wouldn't be law. How did the Emancipation Proclamation actually become law?
All right, the Emancipation Proclamation was not law. The Emancipation Proclamation was a War Powers Act. Lincoln did not believe he could end slavery because it was protected by the Constitution. The right to own property, and slaves were considered property by Supreme Court decision of 1857, the Dred Scott decision. And property is protected by the Constitution at this time. And Lincoln felt he did not have the power as president to abolish slavery. What he decided to do, scratching his ear with the other hand, was to use his war powers, there's a war going on, half the country's in rebellion, to take away property from those who are rebelling against the United States, to prevent that property from being used as part of the rebellion. So the property he was removing were the slaves. In fact, the Emancipation Proclamation did not end slavery. The 13th Amendment to the Constitution, passed after Lincoln was assassinated in late 1865, ended slavery. And then it took 2 more constitutional amendments to actually begin to address the aftermath of slavery. Slaves are free, it doesn't mean they're citizens. So the 14th Amendment gave them citizenship, and the 15th Amendment gave African American males the right to vote.
Yeah, I'm going to get over there in just a second, so hold your question, Dick.
Dick Stilson. Hello?
Hey there.
I have a question about the aftermath of the Second Manassas that I've wondered about before. When Lee decided that he would attack the North, why did he move west to cross the Potomac? It seemed to me a little more natural to head toward Baltimore, where there was an enormous Southern sympathy. Was this ever, is there any documents that deal with this?
Not a great deal, but Lee did talk about his logic and his reasoning in terms of his invasions, both 2 invasions of the North. Both the first one, the Antietam campaign, or the Maryland campaign in '62 that we talked about, and then the '63 campaign, the Gettysburg campaign. The objectives were the same, and in neither case did he want to occupy urban areas. He didn't have the troops to do that, and there were also a lot of Union sympathizers. It's true that Baltimore was sort of a hotbed of secession, but there are also a lot of Union sympathizers as well. And Lee was worried that his army would get bogged down in urban warfare. He doesn't have to capture cities. And he's hoping that men will come to the army if they want to serve, rather than the army going and trying to recruit them in Baltimore. So he's intentionally staying away from the urban areas in the West to avoid having to fight a battle until he is ready to fight a battle. He doesn't have to fight a battle. He's creating panic all over the countryside. So he's having the impact on the hearts and minds of the civilian population that he wants to have without fighting a battle. So why incur the losses? So yeah, they don't know he's not going to go to Baltimore or Philadelphia. So the threat is enough.
Hold on, Alexander. 2 people had their hands up over here.
Well,
Okay?
it was Nancy Owens with some more news. Getting back to the Emancipation Proclamation, wasn't it General Benjamin Butler that really got the ball rolling on that, the contraband situation?
Yeah, Ben Butler, down in the peninsula, was probably the first to use the term contraband of war. And undoubtedly, Lincoln should have given him copyright. Yeah. Because I'm sure that Lincoln, I know, was aware of that. As a matter of fact, the first man to try to emancipate slaves was actually John C. Fremont out in Missouri. Lincoln wasn't ready. Lincoln did not feel the northern population was ready for emancipation when Fremont tried it. And Missouri, remember, was a border state. Missouri was a state where slavery was legal, but it was sitting on the fence. It hadn't seceded yet. And there are a number of critical border states that Lincoln absolutely did not want to secede and join the Confederacy. Missouri, Kentucky, Maryland was one of those, of course. Lincoln once famously said, "We need God on our side, but I must have Kentucky." but yeah, the short answer is yes, Ben Butler did try that, and Lincoln said, "That's a good idea, I'm going to use it."
And it also involved only the states in rebellion.
And that's right, only the states in rebellion as of January the 1st, 1863. So that really gave from September of 62 until January the 1st, 63, any southern state who returned to the Union could keep its slaves. Huge risk on Lincoln's part.
You got a question?
No, I have a comment.
I'm Tom Muller, and I just want to point out that Maryland abolished slavery on its own, I believe, in 1863.
Other questions?
I didn't know that.
Anybody on this side before I go back?
Of course, was it a real legislature or was it a created legislature? I'll check on it, thank you.
Okay, you had a question back here in the back.
Yeah, Randy,
You want to stand up?
great job, by the way. I also
you.
do this for, as part-time, I do battlefield tours at Gettysburg. But it might be interesting just to mention the other invasion that was going on in federal territory, and that was in Kentucky. And I think that doesn't get as much recognition, but with that going on, and what was going on in the Maryland campaign, if both of those were succeeded, there'd been quite a tumultuous time for the North. The campaign in Kentucky doesn't get much.
Absolutely. Randy, is that it? Yeah. You're absolutely right. This whole strategy of invading the North was on two fronts, and in the interest of time, I made the political decision to leave out the Kentucky invasion, but that was going on at the same time. It also was repulsed, but they didn't know that at the time, and there was a great deal of anxiety created in the North by the two simultaneous invasions, Maryland and Kentucky.
Okay, over here, anybody else? All right, anybody on this side that hasn't had an opportunity to ask? Okay. Two. Over here.
Alexander when
Again, yeah.
during the American Civil War, as technology like wire, like telegraphs, they said, what was the range of average to wire, and which side really used it to the fullest? You know, as military.
Okay, the question is about the military telegraph. The telegraph was a relatively new invention. It had been invented in the 1840s by Samuel Morse, of course, invented Morse code as well. I'm a historian. I tried to manage engineers, mostly unsuccessfully, so I'm not sure I can answer your question about the electricity.
Do you know the answer to that?
Anybody know?
Yeah, I know. Telegraph.
A lot of the telegraph lines were destroyed.
Yes. Yes. This is not a wireless instrument. It has to travel over wires, and they did develop portable telegraph keys that went along with them, and batteries to power them. But they were very slow, and the lines were subject to being cut.
Yeah, they would. Major armies would actually hook into the main trunk lines and move forward with lines. And you're right, they would be cut, but they're pretty quickly repaired also. And astonishingly, there wasn't a bunch of interception going on those lines. There wasn't a Confederate listened to Union lines, commands talking about dispatches over the telegraph. There wasn't a lot of interception of that going on. But the telegraph, in fact, in the Gettysburg campaign was a big deal on the first day of the battle.
Yes, yeah.
Because the line was cut, exactly what you said, but they repaired it very quickly and put it back.
Yeah, then off and on throughout the whole Civil War, especially in Northern Virginia, rail lines were destroyed to keep the troop movement down, and also telegraph too, to slow the communications down. At least that's what I've read.
And to answer the question, yeah, absolutely, and to answer the question about which side used it more, the North obviously used it a lot more and a lot more effectively. Robert E. Lee, I think, kind of was of two minds about the telegraph. He famously said, I think it was during the Chancellorsville campaign, that he didn't want his men sending anything over the telegraph because he knew immediately it would be intercepted and read by the enemy. So he didn't trust the telegraph. And he also liked the fact that once he got out in the field, away from Jefferson Davis, who was a notorious micromanager, it was nice not to have Davis being able to send him telegraph messages.
Also, another thing about, I'm on the board of Fairfax Station Railroad Museum. That is where the telegraph was, where they would relay everything back and forth to Manassas, to Abraham Lincoln. That was kind of the last stop, because you figure the railroad was going, you had the telegraph that they could have go at least that far. And then the men would get on their horses, and they would go. So that way, whatever lines were going back and forth that were cut, at least they had the control of the Orange and Alexandria Railroad to Fairfax Station. And if you notice, when Pope left Ox Hill, that was kind of the break, and that's when Clara Barton had to leave. That's when everyone had to leave.
Okay, now, you want to make your announcement?
And I will make my announcement now. All right. We will be having our 150th reenactment of Clara Barton and 3,000 soldiers, medical evacuation that was done at Fairfax Courthouse, Fairfax Station. At Fairfax Station Railroad Museum, it's on Fairfax Station Road. And it will be August 25th and 26th. One special thing that we will be doing that I am in deep throngs with several George Mason University interns is we will be doing a special 10-day exhibit. And that will be from August 24th through September 3rd. And we will be on the back discussing the very things that we will have a big, huge map. We will talk about the soldiers invading locally in this area. We will talk about the railroads and the importance of railroads and how it was used for the first time in our nation's history to transport people to the battle and also wounded back from the battle. And we don't think about triage and where it was all developed, but in technicality it was developed right here in Fairfax County. And anyway, I hope you can come. I've left some flyers up there for you. And I reenact Clara.
Very good. Thank you. Exciting. Jim Lewis reminded me, and that is about the Telegraph, and that is that Lincoln became addicted to the Telegraph. There's a book that was written not too long ago called Mr. Lincoln's T-Mails, which is really a compilation of all the telegraph messages that Lincoln, he actually camped out in the telegraph office. The telegraph office, there was no telegraph in the White House. So he had to go across to the War Department, which is where the old executive office building is now. And actually Lincoln kind of liked that because he got away from all the office seekers that kept bugging him. And so he would go over to the telegraph office, and they had a cot set up there so that he could be there when the reports were coming in from the battlefield, or as close to the battlefield as they could get.
All righty, well, let's give our presenters a real